In the Encyclopedia Britannica's online resources, World War II created many different global conditions that hadn't quite been seen before, perhaps even more severe than World War I. One situation that arose from this was the economic crisis in Europe and the surrounding area. Government leaders and commentators were debating on how to proceed and who needed what. What should be done was a question on many minds, and a proposal on the basics that must be accomplished was given in a speech by George C. Marshall in 1947 at Harvard University, which was eventually given the title The Marshall Plan. The George C. Marshall Foundation gives a very complete and interesting overview of his life. Born December 31st, 1880, during his 79 years of life, George C. Marshall was an American military leader, Chief of Staff of the Army, Secretary of State, and the third Secretary of Defense. Once noted as the Organizer of Victory by Winston Churchill for his leadership in the Allied victory in World War II, Marshall served as the United States Army Chief of Staff during the war and a Chief Military Advisor to President Franklin D. Roosevelt. As Secretary of State, his name was given to the Marshall Plan, for which he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1953. Winston Churchill also once said of him that succeeding generations must not be allowed to forget his achievements or his example. So what exactly did the Marshall Plan do and why was it needed? Well, it was needed to clarify the United States' position on Reconstruction after the war, though interestingly enough it offered no numbers, facts, or figures, just a proposal of what should be done. Eventually it led to some $13 billion in aid to Europe and the surrounding states. It was offered to the Soviet Union as well, but they declined. Now $13 billion may not sound like a lot compared to some of the budget numbers you hear today, but when you consider that the United States had a gross domestic product of $258 billion in 1948, it's quite a significant number. By 1952, as the funding ended, the economy of every state that participated had surpassed pre-war levels. Rachel Thompson wrote for the Social Education publication an article entitled "The World Hangs in the Balance," about why this type of speech was needed, saying that although political leaders debate the applicability of the Marshall Plan concept to an assortment of modern nation-building challenges, most agree that the 1948-51 Marshall Plan in Europe embodied the best of American values and spirit. And obviously, if you look at modern political speeches today, you'll find many examples of politicians who run based on ideas while leaving out straight facts. The fact that this speech led to such changes while without going over these details is why modern scholars still consider it relevant today. While some of the articles I came across think it should be criticized for the lack of concrete facts, numbers, and deadlines, others, like Thompson, point out it did exactly what it was intended to do, that is, call attention to the areas that needed it. She states some of the factors that made this time for Europe harder than any recent memory, and why George Marshall focused his attention there, mentioning the severe droughts, as well as one of the hardest winters on record at that time. Factories had no raw materials to work from, bombed out bridges and roads made transportation very difficult, not to mention the fear the U.S. had for the spread of communism.